She bragged, "I can ruin your life." So I leaked her texts to her boss. The words hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud amidst the cheerful clatter of Christmas dinner. Her voice, a low, venomous whisper meant for my ears alone, as she subtly patted the sleek designer handbag in her lap. Vanessa, my sister-in-law, delivered the threat with a smirk of pure triumph, her eyes glinting with a malice that was both shocking and yet utterly predictable, the culmination of years of subtle jabs and simmering resentment that had finally boiled over into outright war. She leaned in closer, the scent of her expensive perfume suddenly cloying, as she detailed her elegant, cruel plan to present fabricated evidence to the entire family. Evidence that would not only get me fired from our family's marketing firm, but would exile me from the family itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and rage, but I kept my face a carefully composed mask of shocked vulnerability, letting her believe her threat had landed with its intended devastating force. I nodded slowly, playing the part of the terrified victim, all while a cold, calculating resolve began to crystallize deep within me, a plan already forming in the shadows of my fear. For years, Vanessa had been the charming, manipulative shadow in our otherwise close-knit family, the beautiful and cunning sister who had always viewed my marriage to her brother Daniel as a personal betrayal and a threat to her influence. She had never accepted my role as creative director at Lumina Marketing, the boutique firm founded by my father-in-law, Charles, convinced the position was rightfully hers due to birthright, despite her notorious laziness and lack of original ideas. Her resentment festered behind a facade of sisterly affection, manifesting in subtle sabotage of my projects, whispered criticisms to Daniel about my long hours, and a constant undercurrent of competition that poisoned family gatherings. I had always tried to rise above it, attributing it to insecurity, focusing on my love for Daniel and my genuine passion for the business we were building together as a family. But her Christmas dinner threat revealed the true depth of her malice. This was no longer petty jealousy, but a premeditated campaign for total destruction. Her plan was diabolical in its simplicity and cruelty. Over the following week, she presented me with a meticulously crafted dossier of lies. Doctored text messages that made it appear I was conspiring with a competitor, forged financial records suggesting I was funneling company funds into a private account, and a fabricated email thread outlining my intent to poach our biggest client, all timed to coincide with a major company expansion. She gave me an ultimatum: voluntarily resign from Lumina, sign over my shares to her for a fraction of their value, and publicly cite personal reasons and family strain, or she would immediately send the entire packet to Daniel, his parents, and every member of our board of directors. She promised it would not only end my career, but would shatter Daniel's faith in me, turning my husband and in-laws against me forever, leaving me with nothing but a ruined reputation. She relished the power, calling me daily to mock my hesitation and reiterate her favorite phrase, "I can ruin your life," each time sounding more intoxicated by her own perceived cleverness. Instead of succumbing to the panic that clawed at my throat, I feigned utter defeat. I called her, my voice shaking with manufactured tears, and begged for just a little more time, to get my affairs in order, to say a proper goodbye to the company I loved without a messy public scandal. I appealed to her twisted sense of mercy, telling her I needed to find a way to explain this to Daniel without destroying him, a performance that seemed to delight her even further. This bought me the precious time I needed to fight back from the shadows, to become the hunter instead of the prey. I remembered an old vulnerability she had, a password she'd used for everything for years, based on the name of her prized poodle, Gizmo, a fact I knew from helping her reset a social media account years prior. With a trembling hand and a heart full of furious purpose, I began the quiet digital excavation of her own secrets. Gaining access to her cloud account felt like crossing a moral event horizon, but the sight of her unedited, real messages justified the breach instantly. It was a treasure trove of her own monstrous crimes, far worse than the fiction she'd built about me. Scrolling through, I found detailed, gleeful conversations with our main competitor, Sterling Ads, where she was not just flirting with their CEO, but actively plotting to sell Luminous' entire proprietary strategy for our upcoming Zenith campaign, along with confidential client lists and pricing models. The most shocking messages, however, were the brutally honest texts she sent to her vapid socialite friends filled with shockingly racist and elitist comments about her own family members. She mocked Charles, her own father, and the company patriarch, calling him a sentimental old fool who was too cheap to recognize her true worth, and derided her mother's philanthropy as a pathetic attempt to buy social clout. The sheer hypocrisy took my breath away. Here was a woman who presented herself as the family's fierce protector, its most loyal member, casually eviscerating them in private for laughs and social capital. I methodically screenshotted everything, my hands steady now, the fear replaced by a cold, focused fury. I compiled the evidence into a digital package, organizing it with captions for clarity. Plot to sell company secrets to Sterling Ads. Derogatory comments about Charles Lumina. Disparaging remarks about family and clients. I knew timing was everything. Vanessa had called an emergency board meeting for that Friday, under the guise of discussing urgent matters of internal security, where she planned to unveil her fabricated case against me. I would have to strike first, anonymously, to completely dismantle her credibility before she could even open her mouth. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate normality, kissing Daniel goodbye and driving to work as if it were any other day, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. I watched Vanessa stride through the office, radiating confidence, shooting me a look of smug pity as she passed my desk. An hour before the meeting was set to begin, I triggered the anonymous email from an encrypted account, sending the damning package directly to Charles's private email address, the only one family used. I then sat at my desk, pretending to work, every second stretching into an eternity, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I didn't have to wait long. Charles's assistant abruptly announced the board meeting was starting early, her voice tight over the intercom. The conference room was thick with tension. Charles sat at the head of the table, his face pale and stony, his iPad glowing in front of him. Vanessa began her presentation, her voice syrupy with false concern as she clicked to her first slide, titled "A Breach of Trust." She was just about to mention my name when Charles held up a single hand, silencing her. "Before we proceed, Vanessa," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I received a very interesting email this morning." He turned his iPad around to face the room. On the screen was a screenshot of her text calling him a sentimental old fool. The color drained from her face so completely as if she had been bleached. "Would you care to explain this?" Charles asked, his voice beginning to tremble with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. Vanessa stammered, trying to dismiss it as a joke taken out of context, but Charles was not done. He began reading aloud, his voice gaining volume and pain with each word, sharing her plans to sell company secrets to Sterling, her racist comments about clients, her utter contempt for the very family and business she claimed to cherish. The room was utterly silent, save for the horrified gasps of the board members and the ragged sound of Vanessa's breathing. She looked at me, and for the first time, she understood. The pity in my eyes was gone, replaced with cold, unmasked victory. She had tried to ruin my life, but in her arrogance, she had given me the tools to ruin her own. The fallout was swift and absolute. Vanessa was immediately fired and escorted from the building by security, her screams of protest echoing through the silent office. Charles, looking 20 years older, dissolved the meeting and asked to speak with me and Daniel privately. In his office, he wept, apologizing for not seeing his daughter's true nature sooner, and thanking me for having the courage to uncover the truth, however painful it was. The fabricated evidence against me was instantly recognized as the lie it was, and my position within the family and the firm was not just secured, but strengthened. Vanessa was effectively exiled, her inheritance threatened, and the family entered a period of painful but necessary healing. The victory was hollowed by the grief of the betrayal, but it was a victory nonetheless. She bragged she could ruin my life, but in the end, her own words, her own vile texts, were the only weapons I needed to leak to her boss to ensure that it was her life that was utterly and publicly ruined.